today I'm going to focus on PCI and some practical strategies for how you can improve the output. Now, this is kind of an old one. This is out of revision 4 for 853, but I like to utilize this quote to point out that even NIST has said compliance is not security itself. This is how we are reaching our baselines. So we have a commonality across boards. And we can always go above and beyond. And we need to. So the thing is getting past that checklist mentality. And stepping into PCI. Yeah. Don't feel you have to read this. I'll make the slides available. But this is all the 12 requirements. There are vast variety of actual individual controls underneath all these, but PCI at its core, and the reason I'm talking to you guys, it exists so we can protect our cardholder data. This is a key thing that impacts pretty much everybody that's out there. Whether you have one credit card, a debit card, maybe 50. Hey, no judging. But when you're looking at it from a business perspective, we have a lot to cover. And, that's a good thing. This is setting out a standard that, it is required for businesses that utilize payment to adhere to. And yes, there are costs involved. If you're breached, that can go up substantially. If you remember Target, that was a lot of money. But, it's not just about the cost. Again, it's about protecting that information, because at the core, what we all do in cybersecurity is we are protecting sensitive information, whether that's health information, your credit card data, your social security number, thank you, OPM, and everything else in between. But PCI sprung forth from the major credit brands. And they joined together to form the PCI Council. So they set the rules, and then QSAs, qualified security assessors like me, we come along and we assess you annually. And again, it's not optional. But there is a variation on what is required. Now, there are 4 levels, which is determined by your bank, if you're a merchant. Your bank will tell you what level that is. And this is based upon how many transactions you're processing. If you are a level 1, that's over 6 million card transactions in a year. So, think big. Hilton, Delta. If you're huge and you're processing credit cards, you're going to have a level 1. You're going to have to do a report on compliance. And essentially, pretty much every question is going to mostly apply to you. You're at least going to have to go through all of them. Let me put it that way. Now, if you're level 2, that's between 1 million and 6 million. At that point, we get into the SAQs. And as you can see, there are differentiations based upon what you as a merchant provide or the company that you work for. Because even if you're, say you're working help desk or you're their cybersecurity person, system administrator, you're still going to have to support what is behind the scenes to ensure that security controls are implemented, and also help when the auditors come through. Because, I may have some questions for you that maybe whoever's running their quality control and their compliance don't have the answers to because they're not technical. That's typically how it goes. But then along with that, level 3 takes you to 20,000 to 1 million. And then level 4 is below 20,000 processing transactions. So, and with all of these, it narrows down on what you have to cover. So honestly, the easiest one is an SAQA if you get that. So if you've got everything outsourced to a third-party provider that's, they've got all the credit card transactions, they do all that processing. Say you're a mom and pop stop and you've got a Square reader. that's going to have the least amount of stuff that you have to go through. So as we get into this, we'll kind of go through some of the phases. Now, obviously, when we're looking at the start of it, we need to remember that the audit isn't just the audit itself. That's showtime, but we have to do all of our preparation. So with that, we need to be working pretty much year round, because you got to keep the controls in place, make sure, if you've done some patching updates or something, that it hasn't reset some kind of key setting or, God forbid, added something. Also, please be nice with your QSAs. We are here to help you. We're not just, this strong arm auditor. We're going to come in and be like, no, you're wrong. Well, okay, I take that back. There's some like that. But if you get someone like me, I'm going to be like, well, you got this, you don't have this. Here's how you can improve. And here's some extra stuff you can do if you want to do better. So, some of us are here to help you out even more. And, once you get through everything, then there's the setting priorities, closing. If you didn't pass and you have to get something closed out, keep that line of communication so that you can get it closed out sooner and stop having to pay any potential fines if your bank was like, yeah, we'll let you squeeze by, but you got to pay. So let's step into strategies themselves. As I mentioned, preparation. So this year, 4.0, which is now 4.0.1, but I'm just going to say 4.0 for ease, that is now in play, and everyone must be up to 4.0. So with that, scope has now fallen onto the merchants themselves to confirm. So I'm not coming in and asking, all right, what are your systems? Which ones are connected? And trying to figure it out. You're going to have the documentation ready for me. I'm going to come in, review it, and make sure that you guys have reviewed it on an annual basis going forward. But this now falls on the merchant to put their scope in documentation and update as things change. Now, also, PCI, just like any other compliance, if you can segregate your network and narrow that down so you don't have this payment card data transmitting across the whole network, that's going to save you a ton of time and money and less time with me. Pros and cons there, but less time for me to find other bad things, right? When we're talking about audit. So minimize your scope. But key thing with that, test it. Make sure it's actually nice and segmented and works. And documentation. Honestly, this is my biggest battle, regardless of size of entity. Documentation, making sure that it is actually reflecting what is done, both policy and procedure. Things get out of date. They should be being reviewed on an annual basis, but that doesn't always happen. Or something changes. And also, if you go into minute detail in policies and you actually list names versus roles, that also can kind of throw you under the bus. So making sure you've got a level of general versus specifications at the appropriate document is also key. And it's always good, if once you go through a PCI or any other kind of audit really, keep a copy of what you've done so that next year when you're preparing, and also if someone else has to come in and do it, and because I've gone to clients where their whole team has been replaced, no one's there that did the PCI audit the year before, so now I'm having to shepherd them through the process. Whereas other clients that this is, the second or third year with me, and it's like, hey, I need you to pull this up, and they're just like, oh, logging in, here you go, get your screenshot while we're on a Zoom call. Easy peasy, let's make it repeatable. And if you do your own gap analysis, which doing a risk assessment on an annual basis is required. So if you're doing that, there's less chance that I'm going to find something, because you'll find it first and fix it, right? Ideally. Now, another thing that has also become big with 4.0, but should have been done anyway, roles and responsibilities. Now they absolutely have to be called out. Like, this is for each requirement, each of the 12, you have to have roles and responsibilities defined. And you can do this on its own document, or if you want, you can reference back to whatever HR has for job roles. There's no set prescriptive method for this, and I've seen people doing it both ways. Also, training for those that are going to be part of going through a PCI audit. This is also part of that shepherding someone else into the role, so you've got someone that knows your environment and can get what is needed, so you can get your auditor in and out the door. Train them, make it repeatable. Now, vulnerability testing, penetration testing, these are also required. If you are a level 1, you have to have penetration testing annually. If you have any issues, you also got to clean them up and then provide us both copies. And vulnerability scans, you do have to have a qualified scanner that is doing your scans on a quarterly basis and have a passing report. Highly recommend downloading those passing reports and making sure you have a local copy, because I've also had people that they didn't pass because they couldn't get their attestations. So PCI is very black or white. You pass or you fail. There's no middle ground, really. And of course, making sure that you've got your incident response going and you're correcting things, because yes, we do look at those logs as well. And MFA. A lot of stuff has been added in with the 4.0. So, just things to keep in mind. Now, as I said, we're not here as an adversary. We are here to audit and see how you are doing. And yes, it is a pass or fail, but while we can't correct the situation for you, we can tell you, here's what in the guidance you're missing. And, say, yes, if you're asking, well, if I implement this or if I update my policy, will that fix it? Those questions we can absolutely answer. We can't tell you what to do, however. Yeah. Segregation of duties. And some of the common pitfalls. Now, just because you've got security tools, firewalls, IDS, and everything, doesn't mean you're fine. There is still a lot of requirements, and processing through them, sometimes, especially if it's the first time you're going through PCI, you may want to have a PCI consultant to do a gap assessment first. And it's actually highly recommended to do a gap assessment before you go through your first audit. That way you can see what you're going to need and get corrective action before you're in that loop of, okay, well, I just got my failed report sent over to the bank, and now I've got some potential fines coming my way because we can't fix this for a year. So, but along with that, do your annual risk assessments with that in mind too. Take it as a preliminary test that's internal to your team and see how you can improve. Now, scope management. This is always an issue. Even government agencies have had issues with scope creep. You start adding stuff, or you don't have things properly segregated in your firewalls. Yeah, then you're going to have spillover, and that's a nightmare no matter what when there's audit involved, but hey, that's what we're here for. And that's also why we now have the requirement to go through and do scope documentation. And also, anytime you make changes, go back and check your network diagrams, make sure things are taken care of so that it maps up. And then it's not 6 months later and you're, well, we got rid of all this and we added all this extra. And, now someone's got to spend like 3 days redoing a Visio diagram. I've had to wait on those. I've had to create some of those in the past. I don't like it. Which also falls into neglecting documentation. Again, it's a living, breathing project, more or less. And that goes with everything that we're doing in cybersecurity. And bless you. And think about like incident response. Do we have our playbooks up to date? Is there a recent incident that we went through that we could utilize for our annual testing versus having to make everyone set through another tabletop? If you had a malware attack, someone clicked on the wrong thing and you had to go through and do some wiping, those are things that can be documented in those after action reports and utilized as part of your, hey, yeah, we had a live test. But along with that too, other things such as your physical security, making sure you're keeping your visitor logs, for like the front desk, as well as your server rooms. If you've got maintenance that is coming through and actually coming to your location physically, making sure those are up to date, that's more in the documentation to make sure that you're maintaining for when we come in. And that also ties into third parties, because we also now have more stuff as far as, are you including a vendor risk assessment? It's not spelled out that way, but are you checking your third parties? Because you want to look at what exposure are you bringing into your network because you have this third party that's providing some service to you. And, that can be anything. Maybe you've got your MSP or, even just some software specific to you that you have developers creating, and now they're logging in remotely to your network to update it. Well, what do they have access to within your network? Where can they get from there and to? So, these are all things that kind of expand that reach and need to take a look at beforehand. It saves you from getting some surprises. And also, you should be having some level of a third-party assessment anyway, because that should be baked into some of your contracts. Now, yes, that is more on the legal side, and that is stuff that we tend to talk with legal about, but it's all part of what we go through, as well as HR. So there's the people side as well. Are you doing background checks for anyone that has access to the PCI data? So yes, if you've got developers and they have access to it, or a security admin, then you're also going to have a background check that was performed, simply because it is financial data. And to wrap up with best practices. Now, there's always something we can learn, always something we can improve, and not just from our own networks, but what's gone wrong with others. There's always something happening. And it is continuous. We need to make sure this is part of the regular upkeep. And, there are reoccurring things such as, your quarterly scans. So making sure those are maintained on a local drive for that, and that they're passing. Also making sure that your penetration test is performed if it's required for you, or if you want one, if it's not required. Keeping these things going, but also doing a biannual review of your firewall, making sure that your rules are what they should be, and doing that sanity check. That's a reoccurring item. And also doing your account management too. You should have a process in terms of what accounts should we be having, what ones are dormant, who do we need to wipe out. And, most places are doing that at least on a quarterly basis. But some are doing it on a monthly basis. It kind of depends on how much turnover an individual organization tends to have. And then, also everything evolves with security. So making sure you're staying up to date in terms of the security risks that are out there, not just focused on PCI compliance and other compliance, but just keeping yourself secure. Because one of them is, are you guys doing your patching and your updates on a regular basis? Because you should. That's just good cyber hygiene. And also, are you getting regular updates like from CISA and Microsoft or whoever any of your providers are? Are you getting those updates so that you stay up to date and know when there's something coming out? So with that, I'll leave it short and sweet.